Welcome to the Creely Blades podcast, where we talk about knife news, interviews, and the topics of the day in the knife community. Now buckle in and let's get this show started. Welcome to the Creely Blades podcast. I am one of your hosts, Gary Creely, along with Douglas P. Chapman and Paul Darminio. Since this is the first of this podcast, this is sort of an extension of the Preferred Blades podcast that we had done a while back and sort of set that to the side. So just to sort of set some expectations, the hope is to do about 12 podcasts a year, but they may not look like one every month. There may be two or so in 1 month and maybe a couple months without one, depending on our schedules and also depending what's going on in the knife world in general. But today we're going to talk a little bit about knife shows. What are they good for? Absolutely nothing. No, that's not true. Not true at all. But we will talk about some of the pros, some of the cons, some of the things that are good about knife shows, some of the challenging aspects of knife shows. And Doug's been to a lot of knife shows, probably even before I was going to knife shows, and certainly several since. Paul has been to no knife shows. He's no knife show Paul. Now, what role do knife shows play today that might be a little different than what they played a few years ago? But first, let's introduce our hosts. Why don't we start with Doug? And Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started into the knife hobby and kind of bring us up to date with where you currently are.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I entered into the knife hobby quite young, like a lot of different folks who I've heard on podcasts before. I was carrying a pocket knife growing up. Back in the older days, a pocket knife might have gone to school. Teachers might have borrowed them just because they were convenient. So carrying a pocket knife has been part of my complete adult life and most of my growing up. That led to interest in sharpening because the knife's got to be sharp. And from that, I started sharpening when I was about 10 and have progressed significantly into making my first knife in 2000. And now I'm playing with a bar of Damasteel that I hope to turn into my next project.
Okay, Paul, tell us a little bit about your journey as it relates to the world of cutting implements.
Probably similar to Doug. My grandfather always carried a pocket knife. And so anytime anybody needed to open a package or anything, he was always the one to ask. And he told me that a man always needs to have a knife, a wallet, his keys, and a watch if he's going to leave the house. And I guess that stuck with me. So like a lot of kids, I had some flea market knives and Swiss Army knives, but I really didn't start seriously collecting until early 2000s. And that's when I started getting into sharpening more. My grandfather, a lot of his cheaper knives, he would sharpen on a file and then just touch up with an emery cloth as a piece of emery cloth as a strop. So my first sharpening kit was a Gatco kit, a lot like the Lansky, where I had the clamp and the stones, And I proceeded from there. So I quickly learned that those stones didn't do a whole lot to S30V. And I worked my way through that. So I kind of came at it more from the sharpening side of the hobby at first. But I've been collecting ever since, mostly production knives. And as far as knife making, I wouldn't say I've ever made a knife, but with Gary's help, I've had a couple heat-treated blanks that I've been able to kind of put together. I guess more like a kit knife kind of thing with Gary's help. So, yeah, more sharpening for me than knife making. I'm still getting into that. But, yeah, that's about it.
Interesting. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Doug, you also spend some time with a knife stand at markets doing some sharpening. Did you mention that in your in
I
your
did,
yeah.
no,
So
I did not.
that's part of the equation. That wasn't secret, was it?
No.
No. Okay. So you can come see Doug at the Gratz Market in Gratz, Pennsylvania, not Gratz, Austria. And he will be
Crossroads
there.
Market and Auction. Yes.
Crossroads Market and Auction. Yep. Yep. So today we want to talk a little bit about, I didn't talk about my own journey. So similar, I was pretty young. My parents moved from a more urban setting in Norristown, Pennsylvania, to what at the time was considerably more rural, which was Spring City, Pennsylvania. Spring City sits on the Schuylkill River, and every day in the summer, I met a friend, and every day we would go down, dig up worms, and go fishing every day. And if you do much fishing, you know that you need a knife, to cut your line, to do all kinds of things. And so at that time, it was my belief that the finest cutting instruments were made by the Buck Knife Company. And I wanted nothing more than to have a buck knife. But what I actually had, rather than a buck knife, now I forget the exact name of this pattern. It's kind of like a bigger Texas toothpick, but it's two blades. One is a blade and one is a scaler. It's like a dull serrated scaler thing. And I believe the blade was made in Japan. It was a cheap knife. It had wood scales, but it was just like a wood sticker. So it wasn't actually even real wood, but it was a carbon steel blade, a Japanese carbon steel blade. And it was actually pretty decent steel. And it was very thin behind the edge. And it allowed me to develop sharpening skills because the carbon steel was easy to sharpen. The blade geometry was good. And I was able to develop those skills probably closer to 13 or 14 when I was doing that. So, and then, I continued to sharpen and collect knives, a lot of Spyderco. A lot of my early collecting was Spyderco. Of course, I had a few bucks. I really had no interest in slip joints at the time. I have some now. I have a little more interest in them. But I watched a video from Cut Brooklyn. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cut Brooklyn. I'm going to shoot over to that website. Cut Brooklyn is a shop in Brooklyn, and they specialize in culinary knives. And there it is right there. Boom. Hopefully their website. That's them. And I wanted one of these knives so bad. I was like, man, these are so cool. I want one. And it was $500 at the time. Now this is probably 10 years ago now. $500. I'm not going to pay $500 for a knife. A knife's worth $500. That was my thinking at the time. And then I bought $20,000 worth of knife making equipment. And I could make a very bad representation of these knives. Now, interestingly enough, if you look from left to right, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the seventh knife here, I forget what this one is called. I bought a bunch of knife making equipment used from a guy in Jersey. And somehow he had one of these blanks that I don't know how he got it. I don't know where it came from, but I knew exactly what it was. And so I heat treated it and I made my own Cut Brooklyn knife. But I mean, just so I could play with the shape a little bit. And now I make whatever chef's knife I want. But that's how I got started. I got started because I was like $500. So now looking back, I'm like, man, $500, that's not so bad. Well, these aren't $500 anymore. Like if you go to, let's see, well, that's the whole website. There's nowhere else to go. I don't think. That's it. What you see is what you get. So anyway, so I got my stuff. I started making knives. Turns out a large chef's knife is one of the hardest blades to grind. Like it's really hard to grind it. It's thin. It gets hot fast. It's really hard to keep it even. Like even now, like it takes me like a small knife, like one of my Makos. I could probably grind one of those in 5 minutes, freehand, easily. But a big knife like that, that takes some finesse, and it's really easy to screw it up. I made a knife recently. In fact, I have it I have it here in the office. Is it within reach? It was a day. It's a Daymax, which is probably a topic we'll talk about at some point. It's what used to be Sandvik is now Lema. It's a kind of like a Dama steel, but considerably less expensive, but doesn't have the interesting patterns, but sort of a basic alternating pattern. Anyway, I made this knife super thin, really nice, dropped it on its tip and bent the tip, like right when I was finishing the knife. If anybody's made knives, I'm sure you've had it happen. I didn't throw it across the shop. That is sometimes my response, but not this time. Straightened it out the best I can. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to do a video on it. So watch out for that on the YouTube channel. Enough about me. Let's talk about knife shows. So the first knife show I went to, and possibly the first knife show Doug went to, was the Keystone Knife Show. Was that your first knife show?
I think my first
Dedicated
was
knife show?
actually I think it was. But I did in Colorado, I went to the PKA show that's in Denver, and I think it was kind of put on by Dove Knives, the guy who had Dove Knives. But that was one of the early shows I went to, if I did not get to the Lewisburg Keystone Blade Association first.
That Keystone show is a small local show, central Pennsylvania. There are some makers of note that have come out of that show. Jay Nielsen would be one of them. Ken Staggerwalt would be another one. Maybe, probably some others I'm not thinking of. But it punches above its weight for being, a little regional show in central Pennsylvania where there's not a ton of population. That was my first show 9 years ago now. I haven't made it the last couple years because other shows have been at the same time. Texas was the same time this year, and might have been the New York Custom Knife Show last year. So I want to talk about shows a little bit in categories of shows. So the Keystone show, shows like that. There's a Lehigh Valley show. The regional, I call it local to regional. I'd say the Lehigh Valley show is a little more further reaching than the Keystone show at this moment. And they're kind of local shows. So at a local show, for me, one of the hallmarks of a local show is you're going to have more purveyors than makers often. Has that been your experience, Doug?
Unless it's a maker's invitational show, yes. Purveyors, collectors, dealers seem to outnumber the actual makers.
Yeah. That has been my experience as well. So that's your basic show. Tables at shows like that go. Man, I remember my first Keystone show. I think the table was $25. It's more now. It's like 55 or something, 65, something like that. Lehigh Valley, I think I always end up paying it late. It's around 100. And so
that show's coming up.
That show's coming up in like 4 days. Yeah.
Next week. Yeah.
I don't know if this week, like Friday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so probably should make a couple extra knives. I have some left over from the New York show, which that's a story on its own that we'll get to. So that's that class of show. Local, regional, somewhere in between. That's that class of show. Next is sort of your, what I would call higher profile, invitational, or hard to get in shows. The New York Custom Knife Show was one of those. I don't know if that's still the case or not in terms of being hard to get in. What's the Usual Suspects show? Is that in Vegas? USN? Yes. There's a whole pile of them. And as a maker, you got to make a decision like, how many of these shows can I do? What are they worth? What are they worth to me? And that's the next topic of discussion. The other thing is the idea of the bigger national shows. So Blade Show is sort of the big one. Blade Show Atlanta, the biggest knife show in the world. I really would like to go to some shows like outside the country. Of course, that just makes them that much more complicated and expensive to get to, but I really would like to do that. But Blade Show, it was a stay in the U.S. because that's what I'm familiar with, but there's a lot of them. And there's a whole series of Blade shows. You got Blade Show Texas. That's a pretty good show. You got Blade Show Texas. You got Blade West, and that's moved around a couple times. Is that all of them? The Texas, West, and Atlanta. Are those the three? So those are really well done. A lot of foot traffic. What I found in Texas is there's a lot more local traffic in Texas. Atlanta, people are flying in from everywhere from, California to Poland. So that's just huge. And those shows, even some of those invitational shows, like the table fee for the New York Custom Show is around $800. Table fee for Blade Show, again, has a little bit to do with when you pay it, but a table is around $600. Of course, that's a 3-day show, so you're talking 4 or 5 days of hotels, food, lodge, food, travel. Like, it's an expensive endeavor to get to these shows. I don't know. So let's take New York, for instance. $800 for the table. I had to get Doug a hotel room because they put it on Good Friday and Saturday, and I'm a pastor, so I had trouble getting there. Fortunately, it was in driving distance, so I could get there for part of both days. But I had a commitment. We had an Easter egg hunt for the church, where it's a big deal. So anyway, so I had to, I haven't actually. I don't even know what Doug's charging me yet. He hasn't told me. But I'd pay Doug something, and the hotel room, and food, and travel, and everything. You're into a show like that, $1,500, $1,800. I think I sold. What did we sell? About $1,000 worth of knives. Now,
1,200, I think.
maybe 1,200. Now, if I sell $1,200 worth of knives, that doesn't mean I make $1,200. So I may have covered half the cost of that show, maybe. But I did have a pretty lengthy and meaningful conversation with Andrew Demko, which could result in some work down the road that they might have some extra capacity with some of their equipment that they've recently acquired. So, yeah. And there's other guys. I always spend some time talking to the owner of ProTech. What's that fellow's name? I talk to him all the time. That's one of the things about night. What is it?
Dave Wattenberg, I think.
Dave Wattenberg. That sounds right. Dave. I should remember that to say, hey, Dave. I'm sure he didn't remember my name either. So you meet these people, you know their faces. You might even know their knives, but you don't always know their name. But so that's the interesting question about knife shows now. It's what are they worth? So let's talk a little bit about the history of knife shows. Laren's book, The History of Knife Steel, that's a great resource because he has a little section in there about how knife shows started. And I think probably one of the people most responsible for that, actually responsible for a lot of things in the knife world, is A.G. Russell. And he got guys together. If I'm remembering correctly, it kind of started as a section of a gun show and then eventually evolved into exclusively knife shows. So knife shows, like at this point into modern, there are some knife makers and some good knives at knife shows. There's a lot of cheap stuff, a lot of junky stuff, a lot of people just selling inexpensive stuff. So, and it's a different vibe. Knife shows and gun shows, they're just a little different. So that would have been in about the 60s. And there weren't a ton of knife makers. I think thanks to Forged and Fire and other things, I forget the number. I heard 20,000 knife makers in the country. I don't know. How do you count that? when do you officially count as a knife maker? I mean, that's a really hard stat to figure out. But all that to say, the knife shows that I've been attending over the years are not huge sales boons for me. But I think in those early days when there wasn't a lot of knife makers and there wasn't a lot of knife shows like there is now, I mean, if you went to every show in the country, you could probably almost be at a knife show every weekend. But those guys, those early knife makers, I think that was a more significant part of their income. You know, they would go to a knife show and make a month or two worth of income selling knives. And that was the most convenient way to sell a knife. There was no internet. You know, like you could mail order, like if you had a knife business, you'd put an ad in like Blade magazine and be like, have correspondence by mail, maybe a telephone call, send a check, you know, like what a different world. So, Paul, you have never been to a knife show. So, talk a little bit about your level of interest in going to one and why you haven't really felt the need to go to one up till now.
Well, my exposure to the knife hobby outside of, what I could get at the hardware store really started with blade forums. So I think I'm kind of more, I mean, this is 25 years ago, but it's still kind of the more modern approach, right? So this is before Facebook and Instagram existed. So, going on blade forums and looking at pictures people hosted on PhotoBucket was that was the thing for me, So I came at it from that, and then I started hearing about knife shows, right? And of course, I knew I'd been to gun shows that had some knife stuff there, but never a knife specific show. And so you hear about Blade Show, right? And like that's the Super Bowl. That's what you want to go to. And from the very beginning, it's something I've been interested in and I want to go in, and I always follow, even now, whether it's Instagram or whatever, I'm following photo threads on what's going on in those shows. But for me, a lot of it comes down to, am I going to spend money to go to a knife show, or am I going to spend money on knives? And when I look at my disposable income, that decision, I've never really pulled a trigger for that. I would rather buy a knife or buy some sharpening stones, or, a couple years ago, I bought a Tormek, right? So like, for me, it was always a cost benefit analysis, and I've tried a few times to make it work. I've run into work conflicts, like with the Lehigh Valley show a couple times, where our church had
Every
a food
time
pantry.
would be
Yeah, it
probably
always seems to fall on our church's food pantry day. I'm a pastor as well, and so like I got to be there for food pantry day. We got to give out food. So, and going down to Atlanta, I just couldn't make it work. So for me, it was just cost benefit analysis, and I can kind of scratch that itch by looking at Instagram, or you can always go to Gary's house and peruse his collection. But yeah, so for me, it never worked. If I'm gonna buy a knife, most of my knives, pretty much every nice knife I've purchased online, with the exception of a couple customs that I like order from. My first custom knife was from Gary. So I found out about that when you did the Mako Kickstarter, right? So that was another social media thing. So for me, I'm coming at the hobby where a knife show is something that would be nice to go to, but it's not a vital part of my experience because I've never been one. I got hundreds of knives. I love knives. I'm looking at knives on Instagram and YouTube pretty much every day. That's kind of what I do with my downtime. But the going in person to a knife show has just never been part of it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can have a lot of knife collection without ever hitting a knife show. I will say this, that a lot of the knives that I've picked up at knife shows over the years I've liked them more because I'm seeing them all together at the same time. I'm handling them. I might be meeting the maker. Like there's just so much additional input, sensory input to what you get at a knife show, that I usually come home happy, because I think we've all ordered a knife and been like, I don't know if that's what I was after. So it's one of those things where, yeah, but it's not necessary. Here is a real thing that I've had happen more than once. I have been at a knife show and I have sold more knives online that day than I did at the knife show.
Well, I guess that's my question as the relative outsider here for knife shows. For you as a knife maker, you've got your tangible benefits like the actual selling of the knives. You've got the social interaction and the business interactions, purchasing of material. I've heard makers on other podcasts talk about buying lots of handle materials at shows, like where you can handle the stag and things like that, particularly natural handle materials.
Yeah, if you're doing those kinds of handles, yeah.
Yeah, so I can see that there are a lot of non-monetary benefits for both the knife maker and for the hobbyist. So that was kind of my curiosity about your take on that. That I know with your history, Kickstarter was a big part of the Makos, and you sell a ton of stuff online. A lot of your exposure has come through Instagram and YouTube and things like that. So, like for you, what would you like? Why did you go to Blade Show this year? Why did you go to Texas?
In the case of Texas, I did sell enough that I probably made a couple bucks. I probably made a couple bucks. And frankly, I just enjoy taking a flight to Texas, hanging out, seeing that like people actually do wear those hats. And it's just a cultural, it's a cultural event. It's a getaway. Pastoral ministry can be stressful. And so, having an escape of some nature is part of it as well, to do sort of this other thing that I do. But if it was just about dollars and cents, and if it was just about putting knives out the door, but my connection to Knife Center is because I met them at Blade Show. My connection to the company that makes the scales for my blades in Ohio was because of Blade Show. So many of these things, seeing how other knife makers are doing it, having conversations with them, meeting people. I don't know that I would have met Laren Thomas in person if not for Blade Show. And so, and just developing relationships like that. So it's a lot of the intangibles, not so much the dollars and cents. And there are certain guys that will sell out in minutes, no matter how much they bring. I'm not one of those guys.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. You said $600 for a table at Blade Show. A lot of the benefits you're getting from being at Blade Show, could you get that I'm not talking about brown bagging, but the making the connections, meeting Seth from Knife Center or whatever. Could you have done that just as attending the show rather than having a table?
Some of it, yes, and some of it, no. Let's take two of those examples. As the case may be with Seth, for instance, that was because I had a table at Knife Show. If I was just walking around, that connection would not have happened. But my scale guy, I walked around and found him. So I would have found him if I just attended the show. And, a show like Blade Show, if I wasn't going to go as a vendor, going as a attender is not outside. I feel guilty, going away from the table too long and then leaving Doug there. but at the same time, I make some important connections during those times too. And I seem to always miss people that don't come back. Like they're making one pass. But so, yeah, some yes, some no. Some yes and some no. I think if you're serious and you want to progress in the world of making knives, you need to go to Blade. You need to go to Blade Atlanta. Beyond that, everything else is just... So for instance, the shows that I do, Blade Atlanta, Blade Texas, the New York Custom Knife Show, that wasn't a great one for me this time. I don't know that what I do is a perfect fit for the type of show that is. That's more of an EDC folding knife kind of show. Some other guys that sold chef's knife, it's also a higher end show. So I'm not an art knife guy. I'm a user guy. And so that show, I mean, people come in that show and drop money. Like, but just wasn't real well attended, but it was Good Friday. There are still some people to go to church. So I don't know that helped. And then Saturday before Easter, a holiday weekend, that was really bad timing. And now it's moving to August, so it's going to be almost a year and a half before that show happens again. But I'm that's one like I might trade in for something else more interesting. I've been wanting to do like a UK knife show they had. I don't know if they're still having it, but yeah, it's a tough thing. So that's from the maker's standpoint. Although I will say, like, take for instance, every one of my knives has some kind of weight. If it's a few months for a Mako or almost a year for some of the folklores, the beast modes, the beast editions, I have them there. You can buy them off my table. And, I've had people, and the guy, I was next to a guy at Blade Show, Texas, Sam Wilson, who does custom knives. Dude, he had a Rambo knife, a Jimmy Lyle style knife, not exactly that. And he does a really nice job with, dude, I wanted that knife so bad. The 80s kid in me, I mean, man, did I want that knife. And it was like $1,200 for what it was, or $800. And it's just like, man, I want to buy that. And I'm like, deliberating the whole time because I always wanted one of those. And I didn't end up getting it. I did get another knife from him, traded him a knife for one of the smaller ones with the thing. Also he makes a really big fire rod. The fire rod is a good size, but it's got a capsule that you can actually put a fair amount of stuff in it, and on a high quality little compass in there. So with my bushcraft knife, I have that as an option. I have a couple of those from him as an option at my table, the Lehigh Valley Knife Show. So if anybody's going to do that, one of the challenging things is this is our first podcast, so I don't know that a zillion people are going to be listening to this, but I suspect as time goes, and I put it out on some of my social media things, that it will build, because I enjoy listening to these while I'm working, and even though it's usually somewhat free form, it is fun to just kind of hear what other guys are doing, and the goal of the show is to be not only for knife makers but also knife enthusiasts and people who are buying. So we'll probably, one of the things we did with the previous podcast was we walked through the catalog for Spyderco. Spyderco releases these new catalogs. So we just walked through and sort of commented on the catalog. One of the other things I think we'll do is do some reaction videos. So Dutch Bushcraft Knives has my Beast Edition folklore. And so they're going to test it. And I think that'd be a fun episode to just do a reaction video to that, because you send these knives to people, you have no idea. Like, I mean, I don't think they're going to break it. If Joe X didn't break it, I don't think they're going to, but nonetheless, I mean, you don't know. It's a chance.
Yeah.
It's a chance to take. And I also sent him a $350 knife for free. And in the case of DBK, I delivered it to Martin's house. Although he did treat me to dinner, but that didn't cost a trip to the Netherlands and a $350 knife. But I appreciated the dinner. It was an interesting place. It's in the middle of the woods in Holland. It looks like it could have been a murder scene or something, but it was fun. It was a fun trip. But you send these knives to people. So reaction videos. Recently I was involved in some drama with Survive Knives because I basically said MagnaCut's just fine. It's just fine. Like, stop it. Yeah, it moves around in heat treat a little bit. Yeah, you might have got a bad sheet or two, but that could have happened with any steel. That can happen with I've heard stories of that happening with bowler steels. I mean, these are products that people make it's not always perfect every time. But anyway, that video got a fair amount of attention, and I haven't heard much about it since. So hopefully we're done. We're done with that. By the way, this is kind of a cool video I just kind of pulled up that's been playing in the background. It's somebody's video of Blade Show Texas, but that gives you a taste of what these guys have. There's some micarta, there's some burl wood, and you pick out the pieces that you like. Do you have any more commentary, Doug, on knife shows?
It's a really interesting opportunity to see. Okay, so our local knife show is the Keystone Blade Association, and if at some point you're interested, we do have a Facebook page. Feel free to check us out there on Facebook. You get to see what local makers are doing, so you get to kind of get an idea of what the local interest is. You get to meet some local makers, both as a attendee and as an exhibitor. You get to actually connect with more people that have similar interests. I think that is a really neat feature of attending a blade show or a knife show in general. You can make connections that you would never guess outside of a knife show. Like one of the first times I went to the PKA show, or the Keystone Blade Association show, I bought 2 knives from Jay Nielsen because I just knew he was a local maker, and he had some really cool. Bought a kitchen knife and a neck knife.
I remember that kitchen knife.
I think it was maybe a year or 2 later, he was on Forged in Fire as a judge, and his career just went a different direction into the media side of the knife industry, not just the making and the testing and the teaching and the selling, but the actual promoting through visual media the craft of knife making. And I thought that was really unique. But both in Denver and in Atlanta, I know there are forging demonstrations and grinding demonstrations, at least in Atlanta. I know there are classes you can take, both as an exhibitor, you can take the class, or as an attendee, someone just coming to the show to enjoy the opportunity. You can, Tom Crine was doing the grinding class at Blade Show this past year. And I know when I was out in Colorado and Denver, the Dove Knives was doing a forging demonstration. And he started from, raw steel to a heat-treated blank with, no handle, but everything polished and sharpened and ready to go. And he would then sort of auction it off to whoever was watching at the time. So just fun life experiences like that can be had at a knife show that you would miss at most other ways of trying to be involved in the knife industry. You can get to meet representatives from your favorite manufacturers at some of the bigger shows. Spyderco is near and dear to my heart. I appreciate Sal and Gail and Eric and the whole team, Kelly and Joyce. I just saw she announced her retirement, so Joyce, best wishes to you in what you are doing next. But you can look at the different steels, and you can meet the people making the Damascus steel that you want to turn into a project. You can talk to the folks who are making the handle materials and who are sourcing the horn and the antler and the mammoth and all the variety of materials that it is very difficult in at least central Pennsylvania to find people who are, doing that sort of work and offering that sort of opportunity. Now, Mel at Wood Dynamics is a stabilizer. He stabilizes wood, and that was, I didn't realize we had anyone in in the state that was doing that professionally. He does a really nice job, and I met him through Gary, and I actually got him into the Keystone Blade Association show 2 years ago, and he was back this past year, so that was a nice connection as well. But yeah, you can make all sorts of contacts for supplies, for outsourcing certain processes. I don't have a kiln yet, so I got to meet Brad, whose last name I forget, from Peters. I got to meet him at Blade Show. Through Gary, I got to meet... Okay, yeah. Got to meet Laren Thomas, and just, it's neat to be able to connect with these folks who have made major impacts in the community by attending a show.
Yeah. So it is it is still about buying and selling knives. It's still about buying and selling knives, but maybe not to the degree that it once was. And it's not necessarily the make or break moment of your year for people to come and purchase knives. And one of the funny things about Knife Show, and I always joke around about this, as a vendor, you're only ever one customer away from a good show. I've had people buy 3 and 4 knives at a crack. And so, you're never a person. And you know what? You cannot profile people at a knife show. You cannot look at them and say, hey, they look like they have money. Hey, they look like they might buy something, because you can never tell. Now, one of the ways you can tell is the longer they talk to you. Well, no, not even that. But some people will just talk to you forever while other people are coming and going and then not buy anything. That's a pretty classic move that people do at a knife show. Let's go over, I've heard other podcasts do this, so I don't want to belabor this too much. But let's go over knife show etiquette. Because there are some unwritten rules in the knife show behavioral world that would be good to know. So, 1, ask to pick up a knife. Now, some people don't care. That's true. But ask to pick up a knife. That's just safe. Some people do care. So, that's number 1. Number 2, don't put your junk down on their table. Like if you have a bag full of stuff or the knives you have to, don't sit it on their table. Don't sit your food on their table. Like, don't sit anything other than replacing the knife that you picked up from their table back onto their table. Don't steal knives. I was talking to another knife maker in New York, and he had some knives stolen. I assured him it wasn't me. But, that obviously that's obvious in terms of an etiquette thing. Another etiquette thing is don't keep shooting the crap with somebody if you have no interest in buying a knife and there are other people standing at the table that, might have some questions. Stand aside, let that business go. If there's nobody around, sit and talk as long as you want. But if people come up and they're actually going to buy knives and you're just, want to argue about, what hardness you should run Magna Cut at, just move along when you see other people coming to a maker's table. And any etiquette things, Doug? You are more of a etiquette watcher sometimes than me, just in life in general. I don't know about knife shows, but did I miss any?
Well, as we learned from the Mark of the Maker podcast, it is very good form to make sure that you shower and are, reasonably well groomed for the show.
Personal hygiene, yes.
Yeah, personal hygiene is important. In addition to that, most makers appreciate if you can pay cash. That is so as someone who accepts credit card payments, you can lose anywhere from, 3 to 5% on a transaction, depending what system you're using. And that just makes your sale less profitable. So if you bring cash, that takes that processing payment off the board and enables the maker to, get full value for their sale.
Yeah. Yeah. I prefer cash. Yeah, I prefer cash, but I'll take the card. I don't make a thing of it, but yeah. And I have noticed, though, more and more cash, it's more and more card transactions. Each passing year is more and more. I would say I might be at like 30% cash. 30% cash. So, yeah. Yeah, the card thing. But, here's one. I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe Paul is the outsider on the knife show thing. Maybe he can speak into this. Knife show's not typically a place where you want to haggle on the price. I think. Especially from a maker directly. People do it. I don't get offended. But, like I said, all the work, like all my knives that are there are back ordered. I've had people, order knives after being at the knife show that wanted to buy them. And they're like, oh, I don't realize it's like, it sounds like such a sales tactic to say to them, no, these are back ordered. There is a wait if you order them online. So you buy today. So, but, I don't give a discount on one knife at a knife show. Somebody comes up and buys 3 or 4 knives, I'll give them a little bit off. Yeah, I'll do that. And I think in fairness, like and it doesn't offend me when they ask when they're getting several knives. Like one guy got 4 knives, so I gave him some money off because that's a lot of investment in my product. So I appreciate it and I'll do that. But you're just picking up one knife, no. If I can do any better, nope. I think there are makers out there that get mad though if you ask for a discount. I was actually, this was a couple years back, and Demco just came out with that Shark Lock, and they had a zillion knives there. But it was about halfway through the show, I went there to get one. They had like 2, and I bought one of the 2. And the guy next to me, knowing this, is like, oh, can I have $50 off? It was like $130 knife. It's like, dude, you do realize this is the last one, and there's probably 5 people behind you ready to buy it. Like, yeah. So, if you're going to haggle, make sure you're a serious customer and make sure you're buying a fair amount. And then maybe you'll be in line. Some guys will still say no. Because some guys know they're going to sell every knife on the table. You know the craziest deal going at Blade Show every year? He's not across from us anymore. He got an upgraded spot. But
Mike Iyer?
Mike Iyer.
Is
this
that the
guy
name?
brings... what's he sell those knives for? Is it 100? I think it's $100.
I think it's 100. 100 or 120.
It's, Mike Iyer's a respected knife maker, usually like a burl. I have one of his knives, usually like a burl handle, sometimes like a different bolster material, like a G10 or a carbon fiber CPM 154, which is a plenty good steel, underrated. That's probably a show topic right there. But yeah, he sells these knives for $100, and he sells out of them right away. Like, guys come running. I mean, it's such a great value. I mean, it's a $300 knife. I mean, $250, $300, easy. And so every year he brings like 15 of them, sells them out. I think what he's doing is saying, doggone it, I'm going to get my show money back. I'm going to get my travel. I'm going to get the show paid for. Although, I don't know, though, because in material, if you got $20 in the burl and you got, even if you only got like $10 in the steel or $15 and then the sheath, it's probably only making $30 on the knife or something, which isn't hardly worth firing up the grinder. But Yeah, yeah, but it works for him. So yeah, every year he does that. Anything else about knife shows that we didn't cover? We're getting close to our. I think our goal is around an hour for these. So I think you're at 54 minutes. So yeah, yeah. This is a first show. This is almost a little bit of an experiment with the form factor. Knife shows are fresh on my mind because I got one on Friday. I had one 2 weeks, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Was it Texas a few weeks before that? So it's been a very knife showy season. Yeah, it's been a very knife showy season. As a knife maker, I think I only want to have to like significantly travel to like maybe one or two shows a year, and then the local ones like the Keystone, like Lehigh Valley. It's only 30 minutes. Keystone's maybe 2 hours, but yeah. Anything we missed? Anything you want to say about knife show? Paul, are you going to one day actually attend a knife show?
I don't know. Friday's coming up. Friday's coming up.
Friday's coming up. So what do you got on Friday?
I might just be able to sneak over.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I will believe it when I see it.
All right.
But how far is that from you? It's about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a shot up 95 probably, and then over like you would probably do the northward part of it in Jersey, right? Paul lives in South Jersey. Doug lives in Central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I actually live pretty close to the Commodore Barry Bridge, so
you come over.
Sometimes I'll scoot over there and head up. So it depends on what I'm
come
doing.
Over into the promised land.
Yeah.
On the other side of the Delaware. Safe from earthquakes. Cool. Awesome. We didn't do a pocket check, did we?
No,
maybe
not really.
We can end on a pocket check. The only thing I had near me today is the Skeletool from Leatherman. This is one of the better ones. It's got little carbon fibery stuff, and it's got 154 cm for the blade steel, which it is an upgrade from a substantial upgrade from 420, which is what they usually use. Yeah, this is I like these things. They usually sit around and I don't carry them, but that's the only thing I got on me today. I was working on my RV on the roof, so I didn't want anything sharp with me. So this wasn't with me then. All right. Who's next?
All right, I'll
Paul,
go next.
what are you
I don't
carrying
have
today?
anything too special, but I got a Native 5 lightweight in Maximet. That's my first Spyderco in Maximet. I'm enjoying it so far. It's not quite so chippy as everybody warned. And I always carry a Leatherman. I've done that for a long time. I carry one on my belt. And I got a rebar. I've been carrying this one for quite a while. So.
All right. What do you got, Doug?
Well, as long as we're showing multi-tools, I have the Leatherman Surge. That is my daily carry. In addition to that, I have more knives than anyone would believe, so we'll just talk about... So, within arm's reach, I have 4 of Gary's knives.
Nice.
So I have...
I didn't know we could cheat what we can reach.
Well...
All right, I'll cheat.
So... Okay, so I have one of those on me. That's on my belt because we went out to Milmont today. And I also have a modified Mako in MagnaCut, so that's 2 MagnaCuts. And then I have
modified.
a highly modified Microtang Mako that is one that I think Gary threw across the room when something went wrong. And so I turned it into an actual usable tool. That's Rex 121. And
that
then
one,
the last...
I think I broke that one trying to force the standoff in a press. Just went ping.
When the tolerance was not quite set properly.
Yes. I thought it could handle it. Could not.
The last one I have is a minnow. Am I allowed to show a minnow?
Yeah, you can show a minnow.
Okay. So I have a minnow in Rex 121. with fibromascus scales and glow-in-the-dark liners. That's Rex 121. So those are the 4 Creelys that I happen to have with me. 2 off of my belt and 2 that I just had nearby.
Now, looking around, I did see, well, I got a bunch of Makos, but I do have something a little more interesting than my knives. Well, I don't know, it's more interesting than my knives, but it's something different. This here is well, you know what? I'm going to take it out and let's see if you can tell me what it is.
It's about the size of a postage stamp on my screens here, so it's a knife.
Here's a Mako with a busted tip for comparison's sake. This, I don't know if you ever watched his videos. This is a Kyle Noseworthy bake apple. I bought this a while back. It's not very sharp, Kyle. Come on, man. Yeah, I bought this a while back. I watched his videos. I appreciated his. You know, a lot of my knife making I learned by watching videos on YouTube. Walter Sorrells, actually Jack Lore. You know, a lot of his stuff. But I watch a lot of Kyle's videos too, and that's one of his. It just sits here. You know, one of the interesting things about him is I think he grinds his Scandies freehand. What is that?
That is a skeletonized knife I made.
Oh, I think I remember those.
It is Cerakoted Crimson, and it is a neck knife, so this is my red neck knife.
It is your redneck knife. That's exactly what it is.
All right, I can trump you both.
All right.
This is the free with your order Pakistan Barlow from Knife Center.
Sweet.
It came free, and my kids loved it when they were little and gave it to me as a present. And so I carry it for sentimental reasons. No, it does not hold an edge.
Well, I think that's a wrap. We got 1 minute, 1 hour, 5 minutes, 43 seconds. And we talked about some knife shows. This isn't going to be, our finest show. This is just kind of proof of concept. Episode 1. Get it under our belts, get some time in, get the editing in, get it on, and start building. The next show will hopefully be the state of steel. What's hot, what's not, and steel drama. So we'll talk a little bit about the specific challenges of steel and whatnot. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Come again.